Ernest, it is so exciting to have you on board. Insight, thank you for coming on. And I'm ready to learn more about you, your journey, what led you to this point, what got you into the work that you're doing. So many insights I'm sure that you could possibly share with us. Th- Thank you again for coming on board. Let's get started.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just run down real quick as well a little bit about your background. A lot of your background, in addition to consulting, you were actually a social studies teacher. And if I'm not mistaken, you were at what grade level? It was
I had high school,
like high school.
primarily juniors, but at one point I taught every grade in high school, 9 through 12.
Oh my goodness. So those are such formative years too. That will make or break a
Yeah,
generation, those particular years.
definitely.
There, I have friends who are teachers. They always have so many different stories to tell me about all of
And
that. But let's take it back to the beginning before we get into the work that you are doing and what you've done. I want to learn more about Ernest and what Ernest was experiencing as a child, because let's be honest, it all starts there, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah, everything that I am now is, the child that was able to escape, like the child that was able to continue to be nourished. I was actually, so me and my wife, we went to New York this past weekend for some work to see an HBCU game, and I was doing some content. On the way back, we were watching this film called We Grown Now. It's a indie film. Didn't get a lot of publicity. It has some well-known people in it like Journey Smollett and Lil Rel Howery. Highly recommend everybody listening to this go check it out. And I bring that up because that movie, it was based on the South Side of Chicago in the 90s. It reminded me so much of my childhood, man. I can't remember the last time I cried after seeing the film, but that was definitely a film that had me. I was grabbing for the Delta Airline napkins, and I was like like, why am I on this plane crying? But like I say that because, and I don't want to give away the film because it's really good. But I would say that my childhood consisted of like me just using my imagination as much as possible. I was a dreamer, and I think a lot of kids are, right. I think we always like envision ourselves as superheroes and what we want to be when we grow up. And I think just relative to my experience and the experience in the film, I feel like because my parents listened to me, and one of my parents, my mom was an educator, I was able to keep that creative aspect of my life outside of my childhood. I was a curious person. I used to always ask my parents why things were the way they were. I was the why kid. And luckily, my parents either answered the question or they steered me in the right direction. I think when I was younger and I started to get bused to a white neighborhood for school, that was really when my eyes started to open up a lot, because I'm from the South Side of Chicago, predominantly black neighborhood, red line neighborhood. Then I'm going to a Southwest school that was kind of secluded and segregated. So, of course, as kids, we don't look at it. We look different, but we don't think that's a big deal. But apparently something was off, because for me, I noticed that at the end of every school day, it was just me and my black friends that got on the bus to go home. My white friends' neighborhood honestly looked better to me. They had more resources. They were able to walk home from school. And I remember every TV show, because I love TV, showed that same experience. It was like the kids walking home. They had like Saved by the Bell, like they would go to like the little kick it spot and stuff. And I was like, how come we don't have stuff like that? Like,
Oh,
because sometimes like TV and movies and film, it could expand your imagination. And oftentimes too, if your reality does not equate to what that looks like, you can begin to think something's wrong with you. And that's why representation in the media is so important. So for me, we didn't have a local restaurant we can go to. We didn't have anything that was necessarily safe like that, except go in, pick up, and walk home. So I think the culmination of like my childhood could best be summed up with when I was 9. So now I have been at this school for 4 or 5 years at this point. And I asked my mom this question that I think steered the rest of my life and catapulted me to where I am now. And just realizing that, I never seen a black president. Like every president we talked about was a white guy. I had never seen, in our school, us talk about leaders that look like me. But when I went home, we have posters of African leaders all over the house. So like again, there's a disconnect. Like so watching TV, the TV doesn't look like my neighborhood. Going to school, the school topics don't look like what I see in my house. My house was like a museum of some sort. So when I asked my mom why we hadn't had a black president, she said it's because they're waiting on me to grow up. And this is like 1996 or 1997 or something like that, man. So we didn't have, there was nobody could have said we'd see a president like Obama. Nobody could have said that we'd see, you know, in Chicago, like a couple more black mayors. So like that didn't seem like it was even possible. So for my mom to tell me that then, you know, in the midst of like, we got Bill Clinton, we're about to have George Bush, I just couldn't have like thought of a more perfect response. So that was my childhood, and the person I am now, I still have that same hope and optimism despite what I've been through and despite what my people have been through, because I see what we've done in the past, and I also see this vision of the future that I think is better than what we have now.
Absolutely. It's definitely something, it's always a work in progress. And that's the thing a lot of people don't realize. It doesn't just stop. It doesn't stop when a black man or a black person gets elected
Right.
into a particular office. It
Right.
doesn't stop when you see X group in X authority or X position. If anything, it continues even more because now you got people who need, like, regardless of what background they come from, anyone can perpetuate systemic inequalities. So
Right.
now it's about holding these people accountable once they do get into those positions of authority and doing what we can to reframe those structures.
Exactly. I agree 100%.
One of the things that I was thinking about with your answer as well, when you were talking about the disparities between your neighborhood and the white neighborhoods that you were being bused to schools to, is a lot of people don't quite realize to the extent of how much of an impact that can have on any child or even an adult, because development doesn't stop. We're always growing as people.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how you saw these disparities impacting you or the neighborhood you were in, because you don't like, even if it, we see what you've done, we've seen what you've been able to create and make even despite this upbringing that you had, but there's a reason why your case is so beautiful.
Yeah, I think the difference, I guess, and I don't want to say the difference, because there are, I will say, a lot of people who have a background in terms of like the parenting plays a huge role. And I think as an educator, I realized that too. That's going to be probably one of the most important things in your life, regardless of what's on the outside, that place where you lay your head, that place where you have these conversations on a daily basis, that place where, you know, you feel love, or maybe you don't feel love. That's a very important part of our upbringing. Because whenever I saw things that didn't make sense to me, I had someone who was able to make me realize that it's not because of you. Like, you know, one of my favorite quotes is, nothing's wrong with you, something happened to you. So oftentimes we can internalize and personalize our trauma as if we're the reason why it happened, when in fact, these were systems that were already in place, the wheels were already turning. So it was really like, for me, and I didn't, at that point, didn't really, I would say like, I didn't care for Black history, but it wasn't like that. I couldn't conceptualize it, you know, but I was interested in myself. I was interested in these things. You know, the older I got with my friends at the school I went to, and then again, the differences between, you know, my neighborhood, I think it really hit me again when high school, I went to a majority Black high school that was closer to my neighborhood. So now it's like the culture at that school was completely different than the culture at the white school I went to. And I was around a lot of folks who dealt with the same type of circumstances that I dealt with growing up. You know, and as you get older, unfortunately, in those situations, you tend to grow apart from the friends at the elementary school, not because you want to, but it's kind of like society begins to push you or pull you apart. Because, you know, my white friends, and I'll talk about this in my book, like a lot of them were going to like local Catholic schools that were private schools. There were other public schools in the area too, but like everybody was like wanting to go to these Catholic private schools, and that wasn't anything I had heard about growing up. But because they were trying to go, I was like, man, maybe I should go there and be with my friends and things like that. But, you know, as fate would have it, and my parents not going to pay that money, I go to a different high school and we just start to grow apart. And then because of that too, the older you get as a young black man in this country, like as a black child, I should say, you begin to become more stigmatized, and you begin to be viewed through the lens of somebody who does not appreciate you the same. And of course, that doesn't even really start in your teen years. It could start younger. But the differences, I would say, especially in high school, would be something like, you know, when I first started to drive and feeling the pressure of being pulled over with my friends and essentially being labeled as somebody who fits the profile, like trying to continue to keep yourself whole while going through that trauma was something that will always stand out to me. But I think it all rests upon not just the parents in the course, but like being able, because it's truly a community. My mom and dad couldn't do it all. You know, we also went to a church that was, you know, where our pastor spoke from the perspective of Black liberation theology. So a lot of what we discussed in the church was based on our history. It was based on where we came from. We celebrated Kwanzaa in the church. The pastor often had on, you know, dashikis and stuff like that. It was rooted in Black American culture. So that extension of the community, the extension of the house is very important. And I definitely wouldn't be where I am today without that.
Absolutely. Community is so important, especially in, I would say, Western culture in the broad sense, but in the United States in particular. And this is where a lot of your work does tend to center around, I've noticed, which is great. We do need this history because it's severely lacking in US history. I'm grateful for the fact that I grew up in Pennsylvania, and state laws in Pennsylvania, at least where they stand now, you have to learn Black history. It's mandated in all public schools.
Wow.
However, not every state has that. So even though I'm in a mostly all-white community in Pennsylvania, because of those laws that mandated you have to learn Black history, and yes, it was very sanitized, and yes, it was very limited. But I look back, and that's the thing a lot of people don't realize, is we have to reshape the conversation of what privilege actually is. It's not just the monetary aspects. It can be the fact that you actually get to learn something as opposed to what someone else doesn't. You get to learn history. You get to get a sense of a broader sense of history. Those in that of itself, it's so key, at least from my perspective. One of the things that I was really resonating with in your response as well, you were talking about how these disparities, they basically make you grow apart from the people around you, especially as you keep going and you further develop. Speaking from my own experience growing up in a lower income rural community, so I don't want to compare apples and oranges in that sense. It's a completely different experience, but both of them are valid. And both of them, you have this experience of segregation, whether it was institutional or chosen and reinforced by personal behaviors within the community. You have those experiences of disparities between lower income people, even within the communities themselves, like lower income white people. They are being relegated into neighborhoods where where essentially they're in this neighborhood, and then the wealthier ones are in that neighborhood. And because it's such a small community, people know who you are. They know your parents. They know your aunts, your grandparents, everybody.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize as well. And it's one of the things I love about your work is that you're touching in on a lot of intersecting points of Black history as well. You bring in class conflict. You bring in the fact that you have all these influences coming in from outside of the United States that are honing in Black liberation theology. They're honing in on the civil rights movement. All of these beautiful things that you've covered. And I want to ask in terms of your journey and how it got you into the work. How did what you were experiencing growing up lead you into this work as first as a social studies teacher? Because let's be honest, the roots of what you're doing now, those seeds were planted in these days.
Yeah, I think as I began to just kind of matriculate through high school, I always had like a certain level of curiosity, you know, like, I mean, again, going back to my household, my mom was primarily a middle school math teacher. I think she kind of dabbled in social science too, just because they needed her. But she was a middle school teacher. She eventually became an administrator. I saw her mentor her kids a lot. Like she would pick up her students. Now this is the 90s, a little different now probably, but like she would pick up some of her students on Sunday and take them to church with us, and we'd be packed into this small car, that often didn't work a lot most of the time, but like she embraced them as her kids. Like she had a fundraiser to raise money in the mid 90s, around the time I asked that question about the president, to take her students to Washington, D.C. I think they may have only had like one other maybe two or three chaperones, 25, 30 kids, who had never been outside of the South Side of Chicago. So I'm seeing this firsthand. And to me, like I'm seeing a leader. I'm seeing an activist, I'm sure she didn't think anything of it. She was just doing what she was supposed to, but I'm seeing living, breathing Black history. And then I go home, like I said, I see the posters everywhere. I see Harriet Tubman. I see Malcolm X. I see like these artifacts. I have books in my office now that are the same books that were on my mom's bookshelf. So I think I was always kind of curious about like, what else is there to it? Whenever I had to do projects in school and there was an option to pick somebody, they made sure we picked somebody Black. And we had some of these books about like great Black scientists and engineers. So I knew about Elijah McCoy and Granville T. Woods and people like that. So in high school, now that I'm at an all Black high school, the thing that kind of bothered me and stood out to me, and I never really asked my mom this, but I kept it inside. It was like, wait a second. If I'm now at a Black high school, why am I still learning the same things I learned at that white school? So like I began to understand like there's something with these systems, right? Because like you kind of alluded to previously, you can have somebody who might look like you represent you, or it could be like a majority of you in a place, but it doesn't mean that the systems in place will best serve you. So when I was taking history in my class that was, all Black, and we had a, white teacher who was a phenomenal teacher, we still learned world history, starting with white folks in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. We didn't learn back then that they first learned from ancient Kemites in Africa and Egypt and things like that. So again, I'm just wondering. And then we have an English class. Shout out to Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare, but like, why were we only learning about Shakespeare, reading Hamlet and Othello and stuff like that? And we love hip hop. And I was made to believe that that was in some way inferior to the poetry of that time. And in fact, it's just as great to me. It reflects a different time period and experience, right? So by the time I became a senior, I had a choice to make. And thankfully, even by making this choice, I still turned out the way I was supposed to. So I could have taken African American history as a senior in high school. We had it as an elective. So I really wanted to, but at the same time, I had just gotten the car. My mom said, now that you got a car, you got to keep gas in it. You got to, get the oil change, all that stuff. And I needed a job. So the choice is go to school from 8 to 3, then work from like 4 to 8, then do your homework and all that stuff. Or do work study. I don't know if kids can still do that now, but work study was essentially, I had the opportunity to leave school early. What's better than that? and then work from like, I think it was 1 to 5. And then get graded for that and make money. So long story short, I did not choose the Black History course. I chose work study. And at that, this was like 2004 and 5. I was making $8 an hour, man. Like the minimum wage was $5. It ain't going that much. Even back then, I was making more than the federal minimum wage now, which is not a good thing, though. That's horrible. but even with that experience, man, so I didn't take the course, but I saw the disparity. I'm 16, 17 years old. I'm getting on this metro train in Chicago, going downtown as a young Black man, and I'm seeing everybody in their suits and they stuff. And me and my friends who did the same job, we would go in the bathroom, we would change from our baggy clothes and our jerseys to our work clothes with our collar shirts. And we get down there, bro. I was like one of 2 Black folks in my whole department. I worked at a bank downtown, man, at this prestigious bank. And like if I'm one of 2, that means it was only one Black person really there full time, So because I was a kid. I think that experience stood out a lot to me. Just the microaggressions I faced then. I had a really cool supervisor, a white woman who was really cool. who helped mentor me a lot, and she helped me realize that I never wanted to step foot into corporate America again like that. I had the boss or whatever over the department dealt with some microaggressions with his assumption that I wasn't going to a good college, you know. So I was learning this aspect of the racial component of Black history that I probably would have just read about in school, you know. So when I go to college, again, not thinking about Black history, I want to be a psychologist. I signed up for the course because I'm like, yeah, I want to be a psychologist. My friends come to me with their problems. I like to listen, so on and so forth. But I just didn't really like it. And it may have been because of the perspective I was learning it from. Had I learned from maybe like, you know, African-centered psychologists like a Dr. Amos Wilson, maybe it'd be different, but I wasn't learning it that way. And I subsequently almost flunked out of college my first year. So it was at that point that I said, I need to reevaluate what I really want to do and not just pick something because I think I like it or because it might make some money. And I said, let me take this Black history course because I didn't get a chance to in high school. And my friends are telling me it's hard for some reason. And that was a challenge to me because I'm like, there's no way a course about my history can be difficult, you know? And that when I took that course spring of 2006, man, and I have not looked back. I have not looked back. I used to run to that class so I could sit in the front. I liked reading for the first time as a result of that course. And to this day, I'm still reading, still learning, and still teaching and giving it back.
A lot of people don't realize that Black history is human history because our systems and the people who devise these systems have done such a great job at even just removing the essential human elements from Blackness.
Yeah.
This vilification, this sanitization, this cookie cutter sense of that's Black history. That's not our history, but it is our history. We're all a part of this. And it's not even just a matter of like which side of the aisle you're on, because we see it throughout the course of US history and in other points of history, we got to acknowledge the elements of conflict that is so necessary, but there were also elements of solidarity across the racial lines and divides. Yes. And it's so important to really have an authentic conversation about what is Black history, but human history as well. Let's go ahead and I actually, before I get into that, I need to acknowledge something else that you said too. You brought up Shakespeare. I keep telling people all the time that Shakespeare was bringing up gang violence before hip hop.
Right.
People were like quote unquote celebrating, honoring gang violence like long before hip hop started doing it.
Because they dress differently and talk differently. I guess it didn't seem like a big deal because he said thou.
What happened to Mercutio and Romeo and Juliet? Like, if that is not the essential core of a lot of what hip hop talks about, I don't know what is. But I digress. But oh my god! So you went through corporate America as a teenager. You were doing your studies. You went to college. You took your Black history class, and now you are beginning your career. Let's talk about some of the obstacles that you were encountering when you were beginning your career, and as you were going into the social science. The stories, I'm sure you could tell.
Yeah. So I took that course, and I would say probably by the following semester, when I took my second course, I realized I wanted to teach. So we know how that ended up. I ended up majoring in history, minor in African American studies. Went back to grad school to get my master's in education. My first teaching job was actually at an alternative school in Chicago. So these were kids who had gotten kicked out of Chicago. Maybe disciplinary reasons, may have gotten arrested. It could range from like behavior issues. It could range from like weapons, fighting, things like that. So this was, and I had worked that job over the summer before I even had it, so I knew what to expect. But I would say, of course, the first challenge was, I think that as a society, we place the responsibility of solving our issues. And now that I'm saying it out loud, I would say in 2 points. I would say politicians and teachers. I think that we give like too much to each of them, because we'll give the politician credit, if it helps their campaign, but then we'll say they're the worst thing possible if something happens that was out of their control. Same thing for an educator. Like, I might have a kid from 8 to 3, and as a high school teacher, I might only have them for 1 hour. But if the reading scores are down, the math scores are down, or something is going on, then they look at us and start waving their fingers if we could have solved that problem. So, but I began to realize that having these kids from 8 to 3 isn't enough to solve the issues that they are confronting, especially coming from the neighborhoods they came from in Chicago. I had to, I think during that process, I began to realize that, you can't get into the job trying to be a superhero. And I think that's what a lot of folks do when they go into stuff like teaching, maybe social work, maybe being a lawyer. You're like, okay, I know all that, I got all the answers. And I also realized that, like, man, it's interesting teaching history when you're still a child. Because I was like 23. Like, I mean, I can teach. It's easier to teach something when you have lived experience. And I know that's not what we do, because we want our kids to go into teaching young, and I understand. But having been out the class for 2 years now, I'd be a much more effective teacher having experienced, this aspect of life, but I digress. But I would say even my school, because it was a small alternative school, did have some pretty decent resources, but it was just the fact that I could teach the kids what they needed to know. I had a great relationship with them. I only had probably a couple incidents that weren't just weren't that great. The kids were phenomenal overall.
It's usually the kids that are phenomenal. It's
yeah, it was like, yeah, it was everything else. I was just like, I don't know how much longer I could be here, because I don't know if y'all really trying to help these kids, But the issue, of course, was, man, I can't hold their hands when they leave, because they're scholars, right? They're doing their job here, but the pressures of that neighborhood, the pressures of that system, the pressure of having to raise yourself if your parents aren't around, and so on and so forth, became a lot. I eventually went to a bigger school district, and again, the issues there became more. Now I'm in a big area. I'm the minority now as an educator, but my kids are mostly Hispanic, Black, white, all of them mostly low income. So again, now I'm learning more, because I did not experience that aspect of poverty that I saw some of my white students experience. Like, it was mind-boggling to me, because again, going to the segregated area of Chicago, you assume that every white person got a whole bunch of money. But then when I was teaching in this town about 45 minutes from Chicago, it was like, no, that's not the case. And if you travel in America, just like I'm sure I've traveled through some areas in the South, Tennessee, and I'm like, yo, I ain't seen hoods that look like this. You know what I'm saying? So I think that, again, the challenges remain the same. It's from a pedagogical perspective. It's like, why do you even want me to teach this? That became my main question. Why am I teaching kids this if it's not helping them solve the problems that they face on a daily basis? It becomes an indoctrination thing. And as a history teacher, I was essentially the chief indoctrinator, okay? Because I'm the only class where, look, it's really cool when you think about it. If there is a presidential debate, there's not one other class, maybe English could probably do it, but I'm the only class that truly has permission to discuss politics, right? Math is going to take you off track. Science, you can talk about environmental stuff. My class, I can talk about everything and make it relevant to history. So why don't we then also talk about the poverty our kids face, the lack of grocery stores in the food deserts, the fact that they are able to access weapons quicker than fresh food, the fact that, there aren't that many jobs in their neighborhoods, the fact that once they cross this line in their city, the neighborhoods are vastly different. They're $1 million homes. Why aren't we talking about that? So I began to, because I had a little more freedom, insert more stories that reflected how my kids looked. And because my focus was African-American history, then I had a lot of Hispanic kids. I started to learn more about their history. And then I began to even question, well, why don't I know a lot about white abolitionists? So I began to even look at that, because my first, I would say, paradigm shift was when one of my Mexican kids said, oh, Mr. Crim, what were Mexicans doing during slavery? I was like, that's a great question. let me find out.
That's like it goes back to just how intricately woven everything is.
Yeah.
I love the fact that that student had the courage to even ask you that, because now it's getting you thinking.
Yep.
This is where we talk about with biases and everything. It's not that we're bad people. It's just, oh, wait a minute. I didn't think about how this could impact or how this might serve this particular student.
Right.
Hello, everyone. This is Justin Cobb, and that was Ernest Crim III. I am so grateful that Ernest decided to come on to the show and to share his story and how it influences the work that he is currently doing today. It's amazing. Be sure to check it out. I will leave a link to his profile below in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content. We definitely have more insight coming. You can also, in the comment section, view our Medium and our Spotify. There, you will find exclusive content you won't find here on the YouTube channel. Be sure to give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button and share us. Share insights with your friends, your family members, your co-workers, whoever. Go ahead, do that. Love it. Thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to stay tuned for more insights.